Welcome, everybody, to the Interventional Endoscopist podcast. This is Mankaval Sachdev, and I'm your host. And today we're doing a little bit different format. This is going to be on YouTube as well as Twitter and podcast apps and things like that. And this is our fourth podcast. And today I'm going to be interviewing a really good friend of mine, Dr. Toufic Kachaamy. Dr. Kachaamy, who you'll see on the video here, is a therapeutic endoscopist in Arizona. He's in the greater Phoenix area and is the director of endoscopy, head of the GI department, and I believe the chairman of medicine at the Cancer Treatment Centers of America, which is now City of Hope. Dr. Kachaamy did his GI training at the Virginia Commonwealth University and his therapeutic endoscopy training at Mayo Clinic Scottsdale. And he's been in practice for about 11 years, I want to say. And I've known him since day one, and he's a fantastic endoscopist and a great guy. And a couple of reasons we wanted to interview him, or I wanted to interview him, was that he recently took an initiative and started a special interest group with the ASGE based on endoscopic oncology. And over the last 2 years, he's created and directed a very successful therapeutic endoscopy course centered on endoscopic oncology. It just happened last weekend, and we tried to get this done beforehand so we could help promote it a little bit, but that's okay. We can look forward to it for next year. So with that being said, Dr. Kachaamy, why don't you talk to us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, first, Mike, thanks for having me, and congratulations on the podcast. I think that's a fantastic idea, and it's always great to see you. In terms of background, I'm best way I describe myself is I'm a father for 3 boys. I've been married for 11 years, and we've been in Phoenix for 12 years now. Born and raised in Lebanon until my mid-20s when I moved to the United States to go to residency in North Carolina, where I met my wife, and we've been together since then. I describe myself as a wellness enthusiast, and I don't think I work at all because I love my job and it doesn't feel like work.
And what about, tell us a little bit more about your childhood. What got you to go into medicine, and how did you make the decision to cross the pond, as they say?
Yeah, I was very good in math growing up, and I never imagined myself that I'll go into something that does not require math. But my mother, the first time this occurred to me, my mother was sick. My mother had a lot of illnesses when we were growing up, and one time she was in the hospital for 9 months, and physicians would come and go for a few minutes, and I did not feel that any of them showed me the love or the caring, and that's when I started getting the idea. Hey, like I think people who care about other people should be doing this job, and people who want to make you feel better, not just come in and check an order. That's when I started thinking about medicine, and then around the age of 17 is when I debated on engineering medicine, and most of us make these decisions with without a lot of information, and I felt it was a calling. I'm just going to jump into it,
Yeah.
and it was. I have no regrets. I love it.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that I see a lot in my friends and people that I know that went to medical school abroad, is that you're asked to make that decision, whether you want to be a doctor, lawyer, mechanic, baker, whatever it is. You have to make that decision at 17. And I think when you at least in the Indian system, you make that decision, and I think a lot of guys or girls, when they're done at 21, they're like, what did I do with my career? Like, why did I do this? And I think the one benefit of the American system, while it takes longer, is that you do get that time to kind of mature. And fortunately for you, you made the right choice, and that's always a good thing. So, and so then you ended up in Phoenix, and talk a little bit about your interventional training, your mentors, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so ended up. I think it was the second year of interventional GI training. So they were not organized into what they are now, match system. So it was a phone call. Hey, do you want to come here? And my wife standing there, and I got a few phone calls, and then we made the decision to move to Arizona and come to Mayo Clinic. One of the best decisions I've made. And actually, I give my wife the credit. She's always the one who made that decision, because she was choosing based on where she wanted to live.
See,
And
that's why he's smart, because he gives his wife the credit for everything. So. All right.
And I trained with Doug Fagel, who was one of the fathers of US, and I'm grateful for what he taught me in terms of US. And Edwin Harrison trained me on ERCP, and then Raul Panala, a common friend, trained me on everything else. And we're still very close. They supported me when I left. They continue on supporting me when I have a tough question or a career decision I have to make. I call on one of them and ask for their opinion. Training at Mayo was like a utopia. It's a little bit unreal. I mean, you train there, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
There are a lot of resources for the fellow. I had my own secretary as a fellow, which other places don't have that. Yeah.
I think it's hard to go from Mayo to general population, or as I like to say, Gen Pop, because you write an order for a CT scan, and before you get up from the computer, the guy's rolling in to get the patient. And in the real world, so to speak, we have a lot of times where we don't get that luxury. But it's a fantastic place to train. And yeah, I think I've heard of Dr. Fagel. He sounds like he's a pretty famous guy. He wrote a textbook or something, I think. So
he wrote the first textbook on endoscopic oncology, actually.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Which sets us up for my next question, actually, because you recently took the initiative to start the endoscopic oncology special interest group for ASGE. So can you talk a little bit about what got you into that, and how that plays a role into your current work and everything?
Yeah, I've been doing this for 11 years. Basically, I'm an endoscopist in a cancer center. And it was clear to me that there's a big gap between endoscopy and gastroenterology training and what cancer patients need. And at the same time, the multidisciplinary team does not really know and has a hard time keeping up with all the tools that we have coming up, and our procedures, what are the potential adverse events, how do they interact with systemic therapy and things like that. And as I started asking around, or originally looking myself, like where do I learn this information, there was nothing dedicated for this field. Doug Fagel's book, it's an old book, but that was dedicated for this field. Mm-hmm. And there are no journals really for that field. You have to chase where, a publication here, a publication there, and even the guidelines. When you look at the guidelines in cancer patients for the American Society of Gastrointestinal Endoscopy, they're very outdated. So I felt that we need to bridge that gap between the endoscopist and the multidisciplinary cancer team, one through education, and then we also need to step up our research and guideline development specifically for cancer patients. What you do in someone who's on chemotherapy is very different than what you do with someone on immunotherapy, and very different for someone who does not have cancer. But most of our guidelines, for example, talk about a procedure itself, but not a procedure in the setting of cancer.
Right.
So this is a field that's very growing, actually. There's a lot of need for what we do. As I said in my course, for every 1,000 new patients starting systemic therapy in a cancer center, there are 2,000 encounters with the GI team. So what we do is not small. So I felt we needed something dedicated to focus on this area, improve education, research, and guideline development. And I made the proposal to the American Society of Gastrointestinal Endoscopy, and they said you need 100 signatures from interested members. And that's when I called on you and a lot of the folks who do that work, said, hey, would you support this? And I'm grateful. Within a couple of weeks, we got the signatures.
Well, and I think it's actually really interesting, because I was having a conversation earlier today with somebody else, and you and I trained 2010, 11, that time frame, and at that point, the fourth year fellowship was just kind of starting. You were just getting 30 or 40 programs, and now we're at 75 programs. But the more that this field advances, I'm becoming more convinced that we can't just have a fourth year fellowship. You're going to need to do a fourth year fellowship with special emphasis on third space endoscopy or on advanced tissue resection, endobariatrics. And I think endoscopic oncology is probably headed that direction, because one thing I am eagerly waiting to see when this happens is all of the things that our IR colleagues are doing, whether it's TheraSpheres or what they're doing, brachytherapy or injection. I it's only a matter of time before we are able to do this endoscopically. And I think as you get into that world, it may not be enough just to be a really good endosonographer who can do an FNA and maybe do, an axios or necrosectomy, but you've got to be able to understand the chemo aspect of it, the radiation aspect of it. So I think what you're starting in and I'm going to call it today is basically the foundation for another super specialization within therapeutic endoscopy. So I'm really going to be eager to watch how that goes.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I 100% agree. I think this is going to be a super specialty. And, one of our goals in the future would be to develop a rotation that we can offer for either fourth year fellows or someone after their fourth year if they want to spend 3 months and learn the cancer basics, the basics of chemotherapy, immunotherapy, and radiation, and how these interact with our procedures.
Yeah. No, and I think it's a great idea because, being such a young subspecialty within therapeutic endoscopy, you can learn from the mistakes that we've made as a community in terms of ERCP training and EUS training, and all the kind of shortcomings that are there, and learning how to kind of incorporate that into a new field and learning from the mistakes of past. So I look forward to that. So I guess your interest in this also led you to create this course that, as I mentioned earlier, was just last weekend, very successful, very popular in the Phoenix area, had people, big names coming from around the country to speak. Tell me how you kind of came up with that idea and how you where you intend to see it going in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of what I do is I go to oncology courses, and usually I'm the only gastroenterologist there. And when I started going to GI ASCO, for those who are not familiar with GI, ASCO is the American Society of Clinical Oncology, and GI ASCO is their small course or small meeting that is focused on gastrointestinal cancer. That small meeting, it has 6,000 people. It's not as small, but for gastroenterologists it seems small. And
Right.
being there the only gastroenterologist, I felt that we need something that is more focused on gastroenterology in cancer and not basically very heavy oncology. And so I go and learn from GI ASCO and try to summarize what comes from GI ASCO, add it to our meeting. Also, GI ASCO, while it has surgeons, it's still very heavy oncology. So and mostly medical oncology. So the radiation oncologists are there and the surgical oncologists are there, but most of the studies presented and most of the information provided is more heavy on the medical oncology side. And one of the comments that we get in our meeting, whether last year or this year, is it feels truly multidisciplinary. There's no dominant field. It's not 80% medical oncology and 20% something else, because we have the surgeons, the oncologists, the radiation oncologists, we have IR, and so the discussion between the disciplines makes it a lot more engaging, a lot more interesting, and a lot more fun, and it really bridges that gap that I'm talking about, because we're all sharing our data. Oncologists don't read GI journals. Gastroenterologists don't read oncology journals.
Well, I think you're lucky if a GI reads a GI journal, but anyway.
So when we're there talking about our data, you can say, hey, our study showed this, and they say, well, our study showed this. How do you reconcile the two?
Right.
So short of having this kind of interaction, it's very difficult to come to a consensus, which is what the field needs. Hey, this is what we need to do for this patient.
Yeah.
From the endoscopic end. Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think as we get more and more information, across all subspecialties, we're going to be finding that our borders within our fields are melting. I mean, I don't know that we'll ever have, a GI ortho meeting, but definitely, GI with pulmonary, GI with oncology, GI with IR. It's definitely the walls the boundaries are blurring. So
Yeah. So I'm glad you said that, because the vision of the meeting is to grow into interventional oncology.
right,
The field of interventional oncology now is dominated by interventional radiology.
right,
So when you say interventional oncology, most people think of interventional radiology.
right,
And when I think of interventional oncology, I think of interventional pulmonary, interventional pain, interventional radiology,
hmm
and interventional gastroenterology. So as we build on the meeting, eventually when we want to bring pulmonary, we want to have a session for pain.
right.
So it becomes a true multidisciplinary interventional oncology course, sorry, where there's discussion between the different disciplines on how to advance the field.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I mean, what better place to do that than Arizona in March and
Absolutely.
April,
Yeah.
right? Hopefully next time it can be a couple days and we can bring people can bring their golf clubs if they want. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think next year we're planning on 2.5 days.
that's great.
It was a very long day.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the beauty of being able to do things in Phoenix or our area is that we probably have outside of 3 months of the year the best weather in the country, and to come here and see something different and learn something, and then maybe even be able to bring your family and enjoy it. It's actually a great thing for people to come. I wanted to touch on another thing in your specialty, or well, in your world. You're one of the few docs or interventional endoscopists in the country who are on the forefront of cryotherapy. And I know you've done several talks for the different platforms for cryo, and it's not something that we see a lot of in Phoenix at the moment. I mean, we do have some of our interventional colleagues around town are starting to dabble in it, but you were kind of one of the first to do that. So kind of set that up for me. How did you get into it, and again, where are you seeing that going as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was fortunate to train with Alvin Zafas, one of the fathers of cryotherapy, and I trained on cryotherapy in my third year. So before I did interventional training, and there was really no data on it, but I started seeing the patients getting the procedures, feeling better, able to eat, happier. Uh, and I personally have never been satisfied with the outcomes of stents. I think on paper they look a lot better than in real life. And when I joined the cancer center here, I like to do research, and it was for me it was a very low hanging fruit. I know it about the technology and technique that not many people know about, and there's no data on it. It was in the guidelines, so it was the guidelines say you can use it because people knew that it helps, but without data. So it was very easy to just do the procedure and collect data and
Right.
see where the outcomes. What was not available before is any procedures done on patients who are getting chemotherapy. We did not know how safe it was, and
Right.
could you combine chemotherapy with cryotherapy? So people knew that cryotherapy helped people with esophageal cancer swallow, but did not know how to use it, what dose should be used, and can you combine it with chemotherapy? And I took it upon myself to answer all of these questions. And I think 5 years into it, I think I have the answer. It's safe in patients on chemotherapy. It actually probably works better. We have our publication being processed now. It seems to work better in people who, if you do it very close to chemotherapy,
Mm.
and we figured out the dosing. Um, so hopefully our publication will be processed positively and will come out soon, and we'll have all of these answers to the questions that we've had that people always talked about. Hey, what do we do? Yeah, and did not really do anything to advance the field.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I'm laughing. I'm just going to apologize if anybody can hear a child screaming in the background. I have my nephew from Australia here, and something just rile them up. So he's running around and, trying to keep it quiet, but we all have home lives. So apologies to the listening audience.
I, I love kids, and nothing to apologize about having a kid around. Yeah, it's nice to have him with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I know they're visiting, and so we have a very loud household right now. So awesome. Well, no, I look forward to the publication because I think it's something that a lot of us have. The reps have approached us. And me specifically, I've been approached several times, by different companies. Do you want to do cryo? And the answer is always yeah, but and I think with a good publication, it will help to move that forward. Because obviously stents are great for some things, but when you're putting them in an esophageal tumor and that patient retches very violently a few days later, and you come and now you've got a stent looking at you in the stomach, and how do you get it out? There's a big tumor above it. And so I think, something like a cryo that debulks and allows that patient to have good quality of life and sit at the dinner table with their family. I think those type of things are things that we should be pursuing, outside of obviously curative things. But, I think when you're talking about somebody who's suffering from a complication of cancer, I mean, I feel like you're trying to make them have as normal of a life as possible, in addition to lengthening their life. So that's great. And then one other thing that you mentioned earlier, when you were a child or when you were in high school, you were really into math, and you were going back and forth between medicine and engineering. And I think the engineering gene didn't really leave you because you had a very interesting opportunity to participate in this Shark Tank-like experience at ACG a few years ago. Can you talk about that? Talk about the device and where you're at with that?
Yeah, absolutely. The American Gastroenterological Association puts on a Shark Tank like, I call it Nerd Shark Tank.
So AGA, not ACG.
Yeah, the AG.
Yeah.
In San Francisco every year, and I went to a couple conferences, and I have few patents. So one of my ideas said, hey, I'm going to pitch it there, and it happened. It was the year that COVID started, so they canceled the meeting, made it virtual. And I pitched the idea, and fortunately, I won. I won the popular vote and the judges' vote, and that really, thanks to the AGA, accelerated the track for this needle. The needle now, we just had the version 4. Been working on it. I partnered with Microtech on it. And they have been phenomenal to work with. So we're on version 4. We're probably going to go to the FDA now, and it's an EUS access needle, basically to access the bile duct for failed ERCPs for rendezvous, or access the intrahepatic ducts if you don't want to use contrast, or access anywhere you want to access the gallbladder or cyst.
That's amazing. Did you have a name for it yet? Have you named the device yet, or no?
We don't have any. I mean, the name we used during the Shark Tank, and that I had to come up with the name. They called. Hey, when I was like, "What's the name? What's the name?" I used Sure Access Needle, but I can't say we have a name yet.
Well, if anyone listening or watching has ideas, put them in the comments, and maybe Toufic will work with you on the naming rights.
Absolutely, would love it.
All right. And so, so I think, that kind of gets us to where we are. Is there anything else you want to say about any of the topics we talked about? I know we talked about a few of them. We talked about the SIG, we talked about your conference, we talked about Shark Tank, cryotherapy. Anything you wanted to add, or your thoughts on any of those things, or anything else that we haven't covered?
No, I want to thank you for this. This is fun, and I want to thank you for this idea. I've always looked up to, what you're always up to, and I think this is fantastic.
Yeah, it's a fun way to talk to my friends, right? So
yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me, and thanks for doing. My nurse practitioner and I were talking about your podcast and how we're enjoying them. So thank you a lot for that. Yeah.
And as we sign off, just wanted to remind everybody listening or watching that, if you're not a member of the ASGE or FIGHT, you should really consider joining those as an interventional endoscopist. ACG and AGA are great societies as well. Obviously, as GI doctors, we have so many different ways that we can spend our money, ASLD. But, I think ASGE and FIGHT are two of the ones that I really consider. And if you're a hospital or your system pays for it, make them pay for all five, so it's fine. And finally, I always say this at the end of my podcast, for any physician who's struggling, mental health is a big problem. We see a lot of physician suicides in the US. Reach out to your friend, reach out to your neighbor, reach out to me, reach out to anybody, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. But, don't do anything drastic, and, things get better. So definitely talk through your issues, and try not to let it get the best of you. So thank you, everybody, and we'll be signing off. And thank you to Dr. Toufic Kachaamy over at Cancer Treatment Centers of America, soon to be called City of Hope.
Thank you, Mike. I
All
appreciate
right,
it.
take care. Thank you. Bye.